First, please let me say thank you for inviting me to be here and to speak to you. When General Eisenhower entered one of the concentration camps as the war was nearing an end, he was in a state of shock and could not believe what he saw. He asked his aides to take a lot of pictures and said, and I'm quoting him, "If we will not show these pictures, the world will never believe that anything like this could ever have happened." I will now speak to you about my personal life. I was born in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, where I lived with my parents, two brothers, and a sister. Shortly before my bar mitzvah, just a couple weeks or so before my bar mitzvah, I was coming home from one of my lessons and saw no one there. Our door was locked, and I had no idea where they were going. My next-door neighbor, who was not Jewish, saw me out there and came out and told me that my parents, two brothers and sister, who was only 6 years old at that time, along with quite a few other people who were lived on the same street, were picked up and were taken away. Where they were taken, he had no idea. He told me that he knew of some people who lived close to the Hungarian border and were helping people who were being persecuted leave Czechoslovakia and cross illegally into Hungary. Is it loud enough? Should I make it louder? Okay. Well, okay. He called these people who lived close to the Hungarian border, and he told them about me, and they told him he should bring me to that town immediately, because otherwise they will probably pick me up the same evening. And he wanted to make sure that at least he will save that one life. Well, they told him that he should bring me to that town immediately. We took the first train to that town and arrived there around midnight, where we were met by two of those men. I was told that we had no time to waste and must start immediately in order that I cross that border and reach the town in Hungary and locate the person I was to see there. Well, I walked with this one person closer to the border. And after about an hour or so, he told me that this was as far as he could go. He gave me the directions, told me how to avoid the border guards, and also what to do and how to locate the person I was to see once I reached the town in Hungary. Well, I continued walking, crawling at times in mud, so not to be seen by those guards, for the next few hours when I finally reached the town in Hungary. I located the person there, and he seemed to know all about me already. He told me that the people in Czechoslovakia got in touch with him the evening before and that he was expecting me. He said he would help me and assured me that I'll be okay. He asked me if I had any relatives living in Hungary. I told them that I have grandparents living there in a very small town, and also an uncle who lived in Budapest. He said to go to the town where my grandparents lived would be much too risky, and if I'm caught there, not only I, but they too would be arrested for hiding a foreigner in their home. We decided to locate my uncle. I don't believe I will ever forget the look on his face when he opened the door and he saw me. He knew immediately that there was something very wrong and that something bad must have happened. He said I could stay with him as long as I wanted to, and he will help me. Well, after staying with him for a few weeks or so, he received a call, and he was told that one of his neighbors reported him to the police, that another neighbor reported him that he was hiding a foreigner in his place. Immediately, he had to make other arrangements for me. And he got in touch with a distant relative who lived in the outskirts of that city, and he agreed that I move in with him. Well, after staying with him maybe a week or so, I was coming home one evening from the city, and I saw him waiting for me at the streetcar stop where I usually got off. He seemed extremely nervous and upset and said, "Sam, I hate to tell you this, but you cannot come to my home. The police were there a little while ago, and they know I have been having a foreigner in my place." Well, immediately, I changed, and I took the first streetcar back to the city. I didn't even have time to ask him for a little money so I should be able to buy some food. I got on that streetcar, and I had absolutely no idea where to go and what I was going to do. I knew I could not get in touch with my uncle in the city for fear that he would get in trouble. On the way to the city, I noticed a park and decided to get off and spend the night in that park. The next morning, I went into the city and started to look for some type of work. I stopped mostly at restaurants and offered to clean the place and wash dishes, and told them that they would not have to pay me. All I really wanted was some food for the work I'd be doing. No one would really hire me, but once in a while, some of them did help me a little. The next 7 to 8 months, I lived outdoors on the streets of Budapest, most of the time sleeping behind a factory that was closed at night, and I felt fairly safe. During the day, I had the very difficult job of trying to get some food. I stopped at some places, and I couldn't get any food anywhere. Then the only way I thought I could get it is if I would check garbage cans behind restaurants, hoping to find some food in those garbage cans. And you know, when you're as hungry as I used to be at that time, believe it or not, even that tasted quite good. After living on the streets for so many months and worried each day that I shouldn't be caught by the police, I decided that I will go to the police and tell them the truth, and whatever happens, happens. I thought, what could they do to such a young kid whose only crime was that he was Jewish? And then I also told them that I had grandparents living there in a small town, and quite a few other relatives who also lived in that same town, And would it be possible for me to go and stay with them? I don't believe I finished that last sentence when I was slapped in my face and told there's only one place you are going to, and that is straight to prison. I was put into a prison where I spent 2 very long years. And believe it or not, I thought I was there at 20 years, not just the 2 years. But while I was in that prison, I cleaned the place, worked indoors, whatever they asked me to do. But believe it or not, the only people that helped me in that prison were some of those prisoners who tried helping me, and they were trying to get some food to me without the guards noticing it. And that helped me a little. But I spent a very, very long time in that prison. And after about 2 years, I was told that they will release me in custody of my grandparents, but while I am with them, I will have to take 2 days a week and go to the police department in that town. So I had to report to that local police department every Tuesday and Friday. The first time I went to that to report there to that police department, I was beaten, called all kind of names. Most frequently, you stinking Jew, we don't need more of your kind in our country. I was also told that if I say anything to anyone about the way they were treating me, I will immediately be sent back to prison. Now, this went on almost every Tuesday and Friday. After staying with my grandparents for a few months or so, the Germans entered Hungary. And whatever happened to the Jewish people a couple of years before in Czechoslovakia was now happening in Hungary. All the Jewish people in that town were picked up the first day when the Germans got in there and took us to a nearby city where people from different communities were also brought in. After a few days, we were all put on a train into cattle cars and sent to Auschwitz. I'm sure you probably know that Auschwitz was one of their worst concentration camps that they had there. I find it so very difficult to describe to you the terrible conditions while we were on that trip. The trip did take maybe 3.5 days. We were always guarded with soldiers on that train. While on that trip, we did not get any food at all. We had people on that train who never stopped crying, others who were praying constantly. We had children, little children on that train who were screaming and crying. And unfortunately, quite a few of those little children never even made it as far as Auschwitz. Well, when we arrived in Auschwitz, actually the name of the camp that we arrived at, the name of the camp that we arrived at was called Birkenau, which was adjacent to Auschwitz. When we arrived there were soldiers with machine guns and dogs all over the place, making certain that no one escapes. At the gate of the camp at Auschwitz, people had to line up, and some people were sent to the left and some to the right. The people that were sent to the left, and I was in that group, were later sent to work for the Germans. The people that were sent to the right who were mostly elderly people, women with young children, were all given a towel and a bar of soap, and they were told that they would shower and clean up. When they got to the place where they were to shower, doors were locked on them, and gas, instant water came out of those showers. Now this went on every day as thousands and thousands of people kept arriving every single day. I was given a number which was tattooed on my arm, and I was told that I will no longer need to remember my name, I will only be called by my number. After a while in Auschwitz, just a few days or so, by the way, I don't know if any of you remember the name Elie Wiesel. He was just 2 days on the side of the barrack that I stayed. And a few days later, we thought they were getting a visiting committee to see us. Well, it was one officer and 2 of his soldiers. All of us had to stand at attention when they walked in and while this officer spoke to us. And he began by saying, I want all of you to remember what I will be saying to you now. And I want you to remember this real well. This is Auschwitz. Auschwitz is a concentration camp where people will work or be sent to the gas chambers. If you're strong enough and are able to work, you may survive. And I cannot forget how repeated that you may survive. If you are not able and cannot work, you'll be in the gas chambers. The choice is yours. It will be work or the gas chambers. Then this officer looked around and he asked 2 of our men to come forward. And he looked at those 2 men and said, I don't believe that 2 of you will be able to give us a good day's work, and shot both of them right on the spot. And then turned to us, and with that sarcastic smile on his face, said, this I am sure you will always remember. And they left the barrack. Now that was our welcoming committee to Auschwitz. While in Auschwitz, I worked in construction, and my job was most of the time carrying brick to the construction site. There were days when it was so very, very cold that the skin on my fingers came off from touching the cold brick. Of course, we had no gloves. I also worked in a coal mine where I was too weak to lift the empty huge shovel, let alone a shovel with coal on it. I suppose I was fortunate that the person on each side of me was stronger and was able to load coal into those cable cars, and the guards did not notice it. We had a hospital in our camp, and we were told if any of us get sick or hurt on the job, just to report to that hospital. They will take care of us. Well, they took care of us. Anyone that ever entered that place never came out alive. So regardless of how difficult it was, you were afraid to tell them that you were not feeling right. We got up every day about 5 o'clock in the morning and received a cup of black coffee and a slice of dry bread. For lunch, which was the big meal of the day, we received a bowl of soup, which consisted of maybe a little cabbage, potato peels, and whatever garbage they put into that soup. But when you were as hungry as we were, we all enjoyed eating that. In the evening, we again received a cup of black coffee and a slice of dry bread. Now that was our food every single day. The camp was surrounded with barbed wire fences and soldiers on towers surrounding that camp with machine guns. And so escaping from that camp, from Auschwitz, was next to impossible. The camp was also, I don't know if I mentioned that to you, the camp was surrounded with barbed wire fences. Anyone that wanted to commit suicide had it very, very easy. All they had to do is touch that barbed wire fence and you were electrocuted. You know, there isn't a day that went by that we didn't see so many people go to those fences. And the sad part about that was that we didn't even feel bad. I suppose we felt at least those people will no longer have to suffer. Hundreds of people committed suicide every single day. Before the war ended, we were awakened in the middle of the night and we were told to get ready immediately. We're being transferred to another camp. By the way, it was a lie that they told us. They had no intentions to send us to another camp. See, Russian troops were close by, and that's why they wanted us to get out of that camp. And then they told us they're transferring to another camp. There was no other camp at all. But that was a way of torturing us and trying to kill as many people as possible. Well, I was in a death march. They called it the death march. We had about 5,000 to 6,000 people in that march. Then we started that death march. And by the way, it was not the only march. They had quite a few others just like that. After a few days, I don't know exactly how many days, a few days, maybe 5, 6 days, of the 5,000 to 6,000 people that started that march, we may have had about 400 or so people who were still alive. Anyone who could not walk for whatever reason was shot and left behind. Now, I will tell you why so many people died. Every few hours or so, they told us you can sit down on the ground and sit for about 20 minutes and then we'll continue the march. The biggest problem was that most people simply could not get up. We had to sit down on ice, in snow. And as I said, 90% of the people couldn't even get up. And if you couldn't get up, you know they would not leave you alive. Well, it was then that I decided that I would try to do something, that I'm going to try to run out of that line. And maybe by some miracle I might succeed. I didn't think I will, but at that point I wasn't even afraid, and I was not even afraid to die because I knew I will die soon anyhow. But it was in the middle of the night, and I did run out of that line. Would you believe to this day, I have absolutely no idea how far and how long I ran. I don't know whether they were shooting after me or what. I never looked back. I just kept running and running until I fell to the ground and was found by the Russian troops the following day. They found me there unconscious and took me to their hospital. I want you to know they were very, very good to me. They helped me right away. I was only about 80 pounds when I got to that hospital. And they said, we will help you gain some weight, get stronger, and whenever you're ready to go back to your hometown, we will help you go back to your hometown. Well, they did help me after maybe a couple months or so. They felt that I was ready to go back. I can't begin to even tell you how devastated I was when I did get back to my hometown and found out that no one in my family survived. Throughout all the years, while I struggled every single day just trying to survive, didn't have a home to look for, couldn't speak even the Hungarian language, spent 2 years in a Hungarian prison, looked for food in garbage cans, and after all that, I was sent to Auschwitz, to the most inhumane place anyone can ever imagine, the place that was called the kiss of death. Throughout all that time, the only thing that kept me going, and I'm certain that it was the only thing, was that I felt while I was living on that street for so very long, that I always talked to myself and said to myself, I have to be very strong, and maybe by some miracle I will survive and perhaps even be with some members, and perhaps even be with some members of my family. Unfortunately, that did not happen. I was in my hometown. In fact, I was accompanied by 2 Russian soldiers, which were very, very wonderful to me. But when I was in my hometown and I found out that no one escaped, no one survived, I felt that I want to get out of the city as soon as possible. And just a few hours later, I left that city after I was born there and spent 10 years, and I made up my mind that I will never, ever go back to that same city from where I had such terrible memories. Well, I decided to go to the town where my grandparents and quite a few other relatives lived, with the same results. No one there survived. As I was getting ready to leave that town, and after having so many terrible disappointments, something nice did happen. I decided to go back to Germany and stay there in a displaced persons camp, which was supervised by the Americans. And when I was at that border, I met this beautiful young girl whom I knew since I was a little boy, since I was about 5, 6 years old. And she was about the same age, maybe a year or so younger. And I was very excited, and so was she excited. And I asked her, would you like to come back with me to Germany, and we can stay there in a displaced persons camp, and we won't have to worry. We'll get food there, we'll have where to sleep. And she said she would love to go back, but she has an uncle who did survive, but was very, very ill, and she did not want to leave him by himself. But we stayed in touch with each other constantly. And she told me that she had some relatives living in this country, and she talked to them, and they are going to help her and bring her out to this country. And she said to me, why don't you try to go to America? I says, how can I go to America? I know absolutely no one there. I wouldn't even know where to begin. And I want you to know, every time I talked to her, every time I got a letter, and that was very, very often, it always ended the same way. Did you do anything about going to America? Well, by the way, I want you to know, I came 6 months before her to this country, and she was later because they had to wait for papers and all that. Well, I decided I'll take a chance. I didn't know if it's going to help me or not, but I decided I'll go to the American Embassy in Munich, Germany. And I did walk into that embassy, and there I was approached by an American officer in uniform. He approached me, and he wanted to know what I was doing there. I says, I would like to go to America. He says, to America? Why do you want to go to America? I said, because I have a girlfriend who bothers me all the time to go to America. But you must hear the rest of the story. A few days later, a Jeep pulled up at the displaced persons camp where I stayed, and they were paging me. I couldn't speak English, by the way, at all at that time, and they were paging me. And I have to tell you, I was even afraid to answer the page, because in Auschwitz, if we were paged, you weren't seen again anyhow, because this was all a way of torturing. Whatever they asked you to do, we used to have roll calls. They used to take people out of that roll call. Those people were never seen again, and thousands of people were murdered every single day there. So when this friend of mine was standing next to me, he says, don't be afraid to go out. That looks like an American officer in that car. Well, then I felt much better, and I went out to see who it was. And as I was walking out, I realized that he was the same person that greeted me at the embassy. And then, of course, I felt very comfortable, and I walked up to him, and he put his arms around me, and he said, son, you are going to America. I said, really? He said, yes, really. I said, when am I going? He said, you are coming with me right now. And he took me back to the embassy, and shortly after that, I was taken to a harbor and put on an American Army ship and came to this country. When I arrived in this country, I lived in an orphanage for a good while. And while in that orphanage, my friend and I used to be in touch with each other. I think that's where I spent almost all my money for phone calls, because I didn't have much money or anything like that. So most of the time, I used that money to keep calling her, and she called me also. But a few years later, we got married. And I married this young girl that I talked to you about a little while ago now. We were both quite young, and recently we celebrated our 66th anniversary. Thank you. I could go on for a long, long time and keep talking to you about the terrible treatment in those camps, how we watched people die, how we watched people commit suicide. And that was just normal there. It happened there every single day. But I will conclude now. And before I do conclude, may I just say it is now more than 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. More than 70 years, which is a very, very long time. And we have people today, survivors today, who after so many years and are still unable to speak about their past. For a survivor, it was not an easy subject. I know it has taken me a good while before I started talking. It took my wife and me some time before we spoke to our own children about it. But I do feel that it is important, extremely important, for as many people as possible to hear these stories in hope that something like this will never happen again. Thank you very much.